This is part two of our series on how to build a self-driving company. As a reminder, my goal is to help solo founders, product builders, and small teams prepare and upskill for the future. And one way that we're doing that is by sharing some of the learnings, both from my company and from what we're seeing in the market around the latest tools in AI and automation. And specifically, not just in a theoretical way, but how can you use these tools to actually help get some of the time back and to scale yourself better when you're building your company? So, today we're actually going to be focusing on a really important topic, which is content creation. Before we get there, though, I just want to give a quick plug, a quick reminder. This How to Build a Self-Driving Company is going to be a series of videos, and a series of sessions. So hit the subscribe button, follow along. We've identified at least 9 different areas of the business that could be automated. These are things I'm working on for my own business too. So if you're interested, follow along because we're going to be covering other areas in the future also. So like I said, for this session, today's focus is really on content creation. And so today, that's the topic we'll be covering. Before I go into some of the details, I just want to touch very briefly on why content creation is important in the first place and why you want to automate it. So just as a quick personal aside, as an introvert, I don't necessarily love content creation. I don't claim to be a content creation guru. It's also relatively new to me, but I have realized that creating content is critical if you want to build a business, whether you're a solo founder, whether you're a creative. If you want to build a business or you want to build a business, or you want to or you just have an idea that you want to get traction on, being able to build an audience around that idea and having a distribution channel that you can control is really important. And I think it's going to become even more important in the future as more and more people become solo founders and more people switch into entrepreneurship. So why bother automating the content creation process? Well, if you're like me, I like the idea of creating stuff. I like writing, but I don't love all of the pieces that go into it. I don't want to deal with all of the administrative headaches. So I'm trying to save myself time, be able to increase the amount of impact and reach that I have in my business. And I also want to be able to scale myself better, right? And so if I can create more content and I can create it more easily, that makes it easier for me to get my message out on different platforms too. So those are some of the reasons why you might want to create content in the first place and also automate the creation of that content. Before we get into the details of content automation and some of at least what I found to work or the process I've been using so far, I do want to take a minute to talk about what not to do. Because whenever we talk about content automation, I think there's a negative connotation with it right now, or there's a negative association with it, which is that there's a lot of bad behaviors out there, right? And if this is a good example here, if you look at this post, Justin Welsh, he's a solo founder with a pretty large following, and he posted this on social media saying, "Please stop this madness." And it was a screenshot of a LinkedIn post where every single comment on the LinkedIn post was the exact same comment. And so obviously that's bad, right? If that's your brand, you've just posted this generic comment that doesn't really say anything, doesn't really mean much, and it's the exact same comment. It's obvious they're using AI, and it doesn't really add anything to the conversation. That's an example of bad content automation, right? It doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help the poster, it doesn't add value, and it doesn't help you or your brand or to grow your business. It just makes you look bad. So that's not what we're talking about when we say content automation. You still need to use common sense. So some guiding principles are, one, when you're talking about content creation or content automation, make sure you're picking a topic or area of expertise or an area of interest to focus on, because your content will be better in that area. Regardless of whether you use AI or not, your content will be better if you focus on an area of interest. Second thing is, be smart about what pieces to automate and what to keep manual. In this case, Part of the problem was they tried to rely on AI for everything and automate the entire thing, where to the point where it was just way too generic. Again, same thing, focus on adding value and being useful. Protect your personal brand. The whole point, the whole reason why you're creating content in the first place is to extend your brand or your business brand. So protect it as you're creating content and be mindful of the quality of what you're producing. And the last thing is, just because you're automating pieces of this process doesn't mean you lose your humanity, right? You still want to be human and you still want to use your common sense. So my goal here, at least, is to focus on smart automation. We want to automate the process and the pieces that are a hassle, but still leave the human elements in it. So with that said, that's what we'll try to focus on is smart content automation, things that help you produce content faster, but also help you add value and still make sure that your content is useful and meets a certain quality bar. So by the end of this session, you'll be able to do the following. One, take a voice memo, article, or text note and automatically turn it into high quality content for social media platforms. So let's talk about how I've done that. And this is focused on what I've learned so far. There may be other things that other people have done that are even better, and I'm welcome that feedback after this video too. We should all be learning from each other. So the first thing, going back to the point earlier about you don't necessarily want to automate everything. You need to leave some things in there that are the value drivers. So if we look at the typical process for somebody who's creating content, it goes something like this. So you want to generate ideas and insights. It all starts with some idea or some insight about some topic that you're interested in. In my case, the topic of interest is I focus a lot on the product, the future of product, human connection, human skills. So if you're learning about that's your area of interest, you're going to have insights and ideas along the way. Then you are turning those insights into actual content that can be used across different platforms like LinkedIn, Twitter, or X as it's now called, Threads, TikTok, whatever it might be. You're then publishing that content across these different platforms, and then you're tracking the results. In my case, so far what I've found to work fairly well is the most time-consuming part of the process is the producing of the content and spreading it across the different platforms and changing it for the different platforms. The actual idea or the original insight, I find, still needs to come from me. I can use AI to help brainstorm or go ask ChatGPT for some ideas of content or put in some problems that my target customer or audience might have. But the core insight I found works better if it comes from me first. And then I use AI for the slicing and dicing that insight into multiple formats so that I can publish it across platforms. So in my case, I found so far, I've kept the ideas and the insights piece manual. And at the moment, at least, I'm tracking the results you'll see in a fairly manual way. But the pieces that I've started to automate more of is the actual production of the content and being able to publish and schedule it across platforms. So with that said, let's take a quick example. I've been experimenting with this only for a couple of weeks, but already it started to produce value. Using the process that we're going to walk through today, I did one simple thing, which is I recorded a voice memo where I had a spark of an idea. I recorded that voice memo. I posted it to my internal company Slack channel. From the Slack channel, it then was transformed into multiple formats, one of which was a thread format that's good for X or Twitter and Threads. And then it was automatically published to Threads. And it ended up getting about 20,000 views and lots of comments and reposts and shares as well. So I thought that was a good example for myself, also a good test case to see, hey, can I actually produce content that people can engage with and they find useful using a more automated process? And I found that, yes, while it doesn't work consistently all the time, I can produce stuff that I feel is a pretty good quality bar. So now for the rest of the video, I'm going to show you the example process of how to do this in a way that has worked for me and then hopefully is helpful for you as well. Let's talk about what tools we'll need for this session. So hopefully you're familiar with a number of these, but if you're not, I'll just do a quick run through. This is the tools we used for our workflow, by the way. You can do this with a lot of different tools. You can do it with fewer tools if you prefer. I can talk about that at the end. But a couple of the tools we'll be talking about today. One, Slack. If you're not familiar with Slack, it's a communication and collaboration tool that's used by many companies and startups. We're primarily going to be using it as really an entry point for drafting our social media posts and voice memos. Second thing is ChatGPT, Claude, or another AI tool. This we'll use for turning our initial content into a social media post. Make.com, if you're familiar with Zapier, Make.com is essentially a cheaper alternative. It's really useful for connecting different workflows together. Then there's Airtable. Airtable is a database where you can store information, and this we'll use to actually review our social media posts. Then there's Newlink. Newlink is a tool I've found recently for scheduling social media posts and across platforms. There's a lot of these. There are others. Some of them are free. I'll touch on a few alternatives, but I liked Newlink for a few different reasons. I'll touch on them later in the video. And lastly, if you are doing video-based content, CapCut or Canva are good video editing tools that are good for beginners or good for non-technical folks as well. One thing to note, I know this sounds like a lot of tools. I know you can do this in a simpler, probably workflow. I tend to prefer using what I consider to be best-in-class tools for each piece of this, but you could figure out simpler ways of doing it. But at least for the purposes of this session today, what's important is that you get the conceptual idea of how to automate the workflow and what things work, and then you can always swap out tools or find alternative tools in your workflow if you want to do that. And by the way, I may end up doing that at some point too. It's just the market is moving so quickly that some of these tools may become outdated by the time this video even goes out. Last thing I'll say here is the cost. Most, if not all of these tools have a freemium model. You can get pretty far with most of the free tiers. In some cases, because this is so important for my business and the content creation piece, I do think it may be worth paying for certain things. For example, I already pay for the AI tools. I am considering paying for a social media management tool such as Newlink. So it's maybe worth paying for some things depending on how important it is for your business, but you can get pretty far also with free tools. So let's talk about the workflow now. So how do you string these tools together to actually create quality content? So here's the workflow I've been using. As I mentioned, the original idea, and you'll see I put this human sign here because that's coming from me as the human. So the original idea, I don't know about you, but I often have ideas all throughout the day. I'll read an article or somebody says something and it sparks an idea either about product or the future or about where things are going. Or maybe I'm watching a webinar and it sparks something. So I often have ideas all throughout the day. If you're short on ideas, you can also use ChatGPT or Claude to brainstorm ideas. What I recommend there is putting in problems first to say, hey, this is the persona or this is the type of user I'm interested in providing a service to or providing a product to. What are some of the pain points that they might feel? And then generate ideas based on those pain points. I think I found that works better than just generically trying to have those AI tools come up with ideas. So you can use AI tools there as a thought partner for brainstorming. I personally find that I also get just a lot of ideas organically. The biggest issue for me was just when I have an idea, I want to be able to just share it right then and there, or maybe not necessarily post immediately to social media, but I want to be able to capture it somewhere where I know it's going to be recorded, even if it's not perfect. And then later on, I can refine it and make sure that it's good enough before it goes out on social media. So I think so that's where I found Slack to be good, because I've used Slack anyways for my company. So let's say I have an article and I'm reading an article on my phone. I'll just share it to our Slack channel, and I have a private Slack channel set up, which I'll show you in a minute. And I just share it to Slack. That way I know it's logged, and then that kicks off this rest of this workflow. Same thing if I have an idea that I want to capture verbally. I've actually found this part to be a lot of fun. I'll just record a voice note in Slack, and then that also then gets recorded. Same thing. Sometimes I might just have a few bullets that I'll record. And then a separate process, that's for all the kind of text-based content. So I'll touch on the video piece in a minute, but for all the text-based content, I use Slack as my first place where I put all that information, almost as like a note taker. And then from Slack, using make.com, we can set up a workflow where it goes using ChatGPT. In my case, we're using ChatGPT or OpenAI. You can use Claude or other tools too, but it basically converts it into different kinds of content. So it converts it into a long thread for Twitter or Threads, converts it into short tweets for short form content, also can convert it into a longer article. If you want to do something like a newsletter, I've also been playing around with that. From there, I don't publish the content directly without reviewing it. I do find even if you have a good prompt, I've found that it's really important to review the content. And so I'm sending it to Airtable. I like Airtable because it's a database and you can slice and dice the data. You can also send it to Google Sheets, which is free. So Google Sheets is basically like a spreadsheet. It's easy to use too. So you could also easily do that. And then using make.com again, we can send it to the schedule, the publishing tool where it gets scheduled for publishing. So, and Newlink also has some tools to track the results. And from here, once it's scheduled, it basically just goes into all the different platforms. So what's nice about this process is really all I have to do from my side is just have that spark of an idea and make sure I just log it into Slack. It doesn't need to be properly formatted. It doesn't need to be really pretty or even well organized. It's just, I just log my idea in Slack. And then from there, the automation takes care of everything from that point forward, with the exception of maybe just reviewing and a little fine tuning at the end. So that's for text-based content. For video stuff, honestly, I'm still working through what is the best optimal workflow. For now, what I found to work reasonably well is that I can record video either using CapCut or using Canva, edit it right then and there, and then you can actually schedule it using one of those two tools, or you can use a tool like Newlink to get it scheduled and published. So I probably won't focus too much on video content for this conversation. So I probably won't focus too much on video content for this conversation, just because I feel that I'm still kind of refining even my process there. But maybe I'll save that for a future video once I really get the process down. But yeah, so for this one, we'll focus on the text-based content. Now let's walk through a live example of how to set this up. Here's an example of a Slack channel I set up. And just if you're not familiar with Slack, to set up a channel, you just hit the plus button on the left side once you've downloaded and installed Slack. And so I set up a channel called Voice Notes to Social Media. And then in Slack, what you can do is if you just hit this record audio clip button, and you can do this through the Slack mobile app, or you can do it through the desktop. But if you hit this record audio clip button, it'll actually start, and I'll show you an example. It looks like I can't access my microphone right now, but if you hit the record audio clip button, it'll start actually letting you record an audio clip. And then you just send it by hitting the send button into the channel. And that's what will trigger our automation. So I'll play an example of a Slack message that I recorded when I had an idea for a post that I had for a social media post. So here's just a quick example. So I'm going to pause it here. As you can tell, I was basically just recording off the cuff. I had an idea. I think it's about a 2 or 3 minute recording. You can see in Slack, it gives you the full transcript too. But I was speaking off the cuff. I wasn't trying to, you don't have to say exact content of the post. I was just speaking off the cuff, making a few points about product. And it's about a 3 minute audio recording if I kept playing it. So I basically recorded that using the Slack voice notes. I posted it to the Slack message. And then what I'll show you next is behind the scenes, what that did was trigger a automation in make.com. So now we're in make.com, and what make.com lets you do is it lets you connect different apps together. So because we posted a message in our Slack channel, and now I want to take that audio message and I want to run it through ChatGPT. So using make.com, you can actually pull the audio message from that Slack message that I just showed you, and you can actually send it to ChatGPT. So make.com calls these different workflows, it calls them scenarios. So there's a bit of a learning curve with make.com once you first start, but once you get the hang of it, it's pretty straightforward for the most part. But I'll show you an example of what we did here. So if you look at this scenario, it's called voice notes in Slack, and then it'll convert it to Twitter and LinkedIn content. So if I go into this scenario, I'm going to go to edit. This is what it looks like in Slack. Sorry, excuse me, in make.com. So what you do is you can string together these different apps to make a full kind of workflow. So what we did here was we started with, and you can add different, what they call modules to your workflow. So you can add different pieces to your workflow. So what I did here was I started by adding a Slack workflow, because what we want to do is take the message from Slack and then send it to OpenAI or ChatGPT, as many people call it. So when you click on Slack, it gives you a bunch of different options, right? It says, what do you want to do with Slack? You want to search for a message in Slack? Do you want to get a message? Do you want to watch for files being posted? So in my case, because of the automation that I described, we want to watch for messages in a private channel. And again, the channel I set up is the one that I showed you earlier, which is voice notes to social media. So when you click that button, it adds this module. And then what you can do is, assuming you have a Slack account, you can go here and click add, and then it'll basically help you connect to your Slack account. So you follow the instructions, you connect your Slack account, and then you can select which channel you want to watch for messages from. So in our case, we wanted to watch for messages from voice notes social media channel. And I've put a limit of 2 because we don't want to, if I post 100 messages in there, we only want to do 2 at a time. We don't want to overdo it. So that's it. So that's the first piece. Then you can actually add, this is optional, but you can add a little filter here. If you right click here, it lets you add a little filter. All that's saying is just that, hey, just make sure there's an audio file that's posted before you do anything else with it. So we watch for messages in our private Slack channel. I then can download that file. So we add a second module. This is a download file module. And here, all we're saying is, again, it's connected to our Slack account. And because we're uploading an audio file, what we do here is we go to underneath files and we go to the URL. So essentially, we're saying when somebody posts a message in the Slack channel, pull it from, it's a file, then pull the file and get the kind of URL or the address of the file. Then the next step is to send it to ChatGPT. In our case, we're gonna, sorry, it's technically not ChatGPT, it's OpenAI, it's their API, but some people will call it ChatGPT. But essentially, we're sending it to OpenAI to basically create a transcript of our audio message. So if you send it to OpenAI, what you can do here is, this is a connection to OpenAI. The model we want to select is called Whisper. There's lots of different OpenAI models, some of which you may have heard of. In this case, because we're doing transcript, it's called the Whisper model. And we're sending it this file, and it's going to transcribe our audio file. So now what we have is an audio transcript of our voice note that we recorded. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to have OpenAI, ChatGPT, we're going to have it create just a bullet point summary of our transcript. So in this case, we're going to use this model. It's called GPT-4o Mini. We say, send that audio file to GPT-4o. There's a message in here that just says, you are a detail-oriented person who can extract all the details from written content. So it's going to take all the details from our content, and first it's going to get all the details, and then we're going to have it extract from this text and have it convert it to bullet points. The bullet point step is important because then at that point, it's basically taking your transcript and basically just turning it into the key points, key takeaways. So if you're saying all these other things in your original file, those things will be taken away because it's just going to get the key points. At that point, we're going to save it to our database. This could be a Google Sheet if you want it to. In our case, we're using Airtable. Again, you're going to have to connect it to your Airtable. So you're going to have to sign up for an account with Airtable. If you want, you can also use Google Sheets and have it store the information there. So we used Airtable. We have a database in our Airtable called social media content, and we have a table in there called audio transcript. So it'll just save that transcript in there for future reference. Now we add what's called a router. So a router is just a way to say, hey, listen, this record that's saved in Airtable, send it a few different places, because we want to create different kinds of content. We want to create LinkedIn content. We want to create a long thread. We want to create a short tweet. So we're focusing on 3 kinds of content here. So the router will send that same transcript and the bullet points to 3 different ChatGPT requests, each of which are saying, go ahead and convert that into different forms of content. So I'm not going to go through each one, but actually the trickiest one was this long thread one, which is, if you've ever gone to Twitter or X, or if you've been on Threads, you see sometimes people post these long threads. So I really like long threads of content. So I spent some time on this one, but basically it'll take our bullet points, and what it does is it sends it to a custom ChatGPT sort of custom assistant that we had created. And I'll show you how to do that in a minute. And it sends it this transcript. The key part here is that if you've seen content, AI generated content, it sounds very generic. It doesn't really sound like your voice. It sounds kind of very, very generic. There's lots of emojis, all that kind of stuff. So what creating a custom assistant or custom chat GPT lets you do is you can feed it with your own voice, your own information. You can also give it specific instructions that are different than just the base version of what you might get with ChatGPT. So here we're sending it our transcript from the database, and then it's going to convert it into a thread that we can use later. So I'm going to show you what the result, and one last thing, that thread we're going to save back as a record in Airtable. So each of these pieces of content, we're going to save into the Airtable. So I'm going to show you what that actually looks like in a minute. But basically, by the end of this workflow, so what we've done in this workflow is essentially we watched for Slack message post to our private Slack channel. We transcribed it using OpenAI. We then converted it into bullet points. We saved the transcript in Airtable, and we sent 3 different messages to OpenAI to convert that transcript and the bullet points into different kinds of content, which we're now saving. So at this point, we should have a good base of content that we can then review and decide if we want to publish. So in the next step, we'll go ahead and take a look at the content, and then I'll show you how I typically review it. Before I show you the social media content that was generated from our voice note, I just want to take a quick minute to show you, as I mentioned, we created a custom assistant in ChatGPT, or using the OpenAI developer platform. I just wanted to show you what that looks like. There's actually 2 different ways to do this. One is, if you're non-technical, you don't necessarily need to create it this way. You could also go to the ChatGPT, just regular ChatGPT. If you're non-technical, you could go to ChatGPT and create what's known as a custom GPT. So if you go to ChatGPT and you go to create, so if you go to ChatGPT / I think it's GPTs, but there's a link to create a custom GPT. What you can do is click create, and you can actually create a custom GPT here and tell it exactly what you want it to do. And I'm going to show you in a minute the prompt we used. So you can also try using this prompt on using the regular ChatGPT platform. The reason why we chose to use the developer side, so the APIs, if you're familiar with it, is because then you can fully run an automated workflow. So you don't even have to go and copy and paste your transcript, put it into ChatGPT. You can actually just do it fully automated. So in this flow, I'm showing you in a fully automated version of how you would do this. If you wanted to do this in a low-tech way, you could also just record a Slack message, voice note, copy and paste the transcript, and then pop it into ChatGPT or a custom GPT and basically have it generate the content that way, and then manually do all these steps. So the main reason I'm showing you this flow is because we can do it in a fully automated way. So here inside, if you go to assistants inside the developer platform, you can create an assistant, and then you can give it custom instructions. So in this case, this was the key for us to generate high quality content, this prompt. So we said, you're a professional human copywriter. And I personally like to use this. Other people can use other things, but because I've been in consultancy and I know what that work looks, I know they're very good at communicating. I personally like to use this prompt where it says, you use the pyramid framework to communicate your ideas in a structured, evidence-based, and detail-oriented manner. So I found that to work well for my communication style, because the pyramid framework is what a lot of former consultants use. It's just a way to structure your ideas in a structured manner. So you can feel free to borrow that. If you want to use your own style, you can feed in your own style. But I'll tell you a couple of key things that you want to make sure to include in your prompt. So anyways, we said you're a professional human copywriter. The word human is important because it humanizes the language. But essentially, when given a transcript of a voice note, you transform it into a persuasive tweet thread for Twitter. Now, the instructions tell it to select a compelling hook, and then we tell it how to organize the content. So in this case, we're saying break it down into 3 to 10 main subheadlines, and then provide supporting points for each, because I want it to be a rigorous content. I don't want it to feel fluffy like what I showed you at the beginning. I would also like to give it formatting rules. So some of the key rules, one of the big things is I tell it, do not use hashtags or emojis, because that just is a blatant giveaway that this is AI, and it looks very generic and not very sophisticated, at least for the kind of content I'm trying to produce. And I found that if you capitalize it, it tends to listen to it more. I also told it not to add any external facts or data, just to make sure it doesn't hallucinate and make up something that wasn't in my original key points. And then, like I said, using human language, telling it to use human language definitely helps as well. In this case, because we're doing tweet threads, each thread should be no longer than 280 characters. So we told it that explicitly. The last thing I found that helps a lot is to give it an example. So if you write out a best version, write out 3 really great tweets, 3 tweets that are 3 examples of content that you think are excellent from your perspective. I think 3 is a good number. If you do 1 or 2, it kind of over indexes on just copying the one example. But if you put in 2 or 3, it usually does a better job. But in my case, I pulled one of my existing threads that had gotten a number of views, and I put it here as an example for it to follow. And that I found helps a lot. In this case, you can also give it additional files. Let's say you have a bunch of your custom content. You can attach additional files here also, and then it'll use those. I found that to work sometimes. Sometimes it does it, sometimes it doesn't, but it'll borrow from those files to generate the content. And then you can put some additional settings here if you want. You can play around with it. You can actually send test messages here and see what works and what doesn't work, just to see what's workable for you. But there's other settings here. For example, temperature. This is a setting where you can figure out how much randomness do you want. Do you want it to really closely follow your original tweet, or do you want it to be a little bit more creative? So you can set the different settings down here, but that's basically how you create a custom assistant that you can call using make.com. So without further ado, let's move to actually showing you the content that was generated, or the example that was generated. So here we are now inside Airtable. So like I said, you can also do this in a Google Sheet if you want to keep it simple, but Airtable gives you the opportunity to slice and dice stuff in different ways. But here you can see, here's our example tweet, the tweet thread that started as a voice note. It's now come in here as a thread, and it's tagged that it's for Twitter. It's tagged what type. It's a long text or thread. It comes in here under review status because I don't want anything posted until I've had a chance to review it. And the reality is that there are times where I want to edit what it has generated. So just like when you use ChatGPT, sometimes it's good at generating the first draft, but I do want to edit it, or I need to change it a little bit. But actually, overall, it's been doing a pretty good job. So when it comes in here, the voice note, it turns it into a thread following the format that I like, which is like number 1 key point, then some subpoints underneath it, number 2 key point, then subpoints underneath it. So I can't remember if this one I had edited lightly maybe, but it comes in here in a pretty good format, much better than what I've seen just with regular AI. And then I'd usually edit it just a little bit. And then I'll show you the last piece of this, which is once I set this to approve, we'll kick off another automation that basically then sends it to social media for publishing. So this part is really key, though. I do feel that no matter what you produce in terms of automation, you do want to review it. So for now, I've been having a once a week meeting just with myself to go and review these and approve it, and it's pretty quick. I just kind of go, quickly edit, and then review. But let's see if we can see any other examples of what's come through. These are some short tweets. Here's another long one. Looks like this one's pretty short. Let's see what else has come in. Here's one. See, so I feel like the formatting, the content, it's actually pretty good. But sometimes I have to adjust the headline. Sometimes I have to change it. So I'm still playing around with what works best for my style. But overall, I found it to be a really great head start where I don't have to create everything from scratch, and it can start from just an idea or even a voice note. Now let's look at the last part of this automation, which is basically this one here you see. So what this does is when I hit that approve button, what I just showed you in the last step of saying, hey, Airtable, this post has been approved. I just wanted to go and automatically set it up for publishing on Twitter and on Threads and whatever other platform. So what this automation does is it basically, once again, we create this module that's kind of like a watch module. So in this case, we're basically watching the Airtable record for for a post that hits the status of approved. So what you can see here is we're doing a search. So we're doing a search within, sorry, I should clarify, it's not a watch, it's a search. We're doing a search. So we added a module for searching records in Airtable. And then what it does is that table I was just showing you with social media content and posts, it basically searched those posts and we've added a filter. So we're looking for posts, in this case, that are for Twitter and the status is approved. So what this does is pulls up all the posts that have been approved. And in this case, we're just double checking it with this filter here just to make sure it's only pulling approved posts, because what we don't want is accidentally posting something that was not approved or in review status. So what it's done now is it's pulled up a list of posts. It's pulled up ones that are in approved status. I have put a limit here of one at a time. I don't want it pulling many posts. I just want it to be scheduling one post at a time. But what you can do is you can have this automation run every so often. Here it's set to run every 5 hours. So every couple hours, it'll pull a new post, it'll add it to the queue. So what this does, and I'll show you New Link in a minute, but what this does then is it takes that record from Airtable and it sends it to New Link, which is the tool we use for scheduling posts. There are other tools out there you can use for this too. You could also manually post it. It's up to you, but I do find it helpful to schedule posts when possible. So once again, we said at the post and send it to New Link. And then the last thing it does is it goes back to Airtable and we just need to make sure that the status is changed to published for that specific post. So we tag which ID it was for the post that we were marking as published, and then we tag it as published, or we change the status to published. So that way it's not going to show up in this search anymore because now it's been marked as published. So basically now with this automation, what you've done is you've taken a record that was approved by us in Airtable and we've sent it to New Link to publish, and then you can go ahead and have it publish on via New Link. So the last step is I'll show you what happens when something goes into New Link. So let me just show you now once what it looks like if you run this automation in Airtable once. So if I run this, let me just show you. Before I go to new, actually, I just want to show you one more thing. So I just want to show you how the automation looks when it runs. So we've been talking about this post. So let's say I want to go ahead and approve it now. So I go ahead and hit approve. Now, let's just go to make.com real quick and I'll show you how it looks when it's been approved and how the automation runs, and then we'll go to New Link. So I'm back in make.com after hitting approve in my Airtable, and I'm going to run this once. And hopefully what you see here is you see this one. So it has pulled that one, it's recognized that that one post about the future of product or the reality of product jobs was approved. It got sent to New Link and the record in Airtable was updated to published. So now we're going to go to New Link and take a look at how this shows up in New Link. So now we're in New Link, and as I mentioned, this isn't the only scheduling tool out there. This is one that seems like it's relatively new, but I just found it recently. I do like some of the specific features they have. That's why I chose this. There are other ones. Probably the most popular one that's known out there is called Buffer. It's also good. There were some things missing that I like about this one that Buffer didn't seem to have. And also their pricing is a little bit more cost effective than Buffer. But here's a couple things I'll show you. So based on that automation, this social media post came in as as you can see, a long thread in our queue. So at this point, it's already automatically been scheduled for posting, and it's going to post on Threads and it's going to post on X or Twitter. But if you want to edit it, you can. But one of the cool things I did like about New Link, and if you want to do some other things, if you want to add images, if you want to change it, you can also change it in here. But one thing I liked about New Link is that it automatically, so it was a long piece of text, it automatically splits it up into a thread. And a number of the other tools didn't actually do that. So it'll automatically format it as a thread, which I really liked, given, at least in my case, I tend to post a lot of threads. The other thing that's a little bit cool about New Link and a little bit unique is that they do set up these collections. So depending on what kinds of content you're posting. So I have a collection that's focused specifically on long text threads. So I can control based on the type of collection what kind of schedule I want that content on. So long text threads, maybe I only want to post once a day, but short videos, I want to post 3 times. So it'll automatically add it to the queue based on the type of content and then post on that schedule. All right, so now based on that, you've seen the end-to-end flow at this point from taking a voice note to converting it into shorter bullets, turning that into a thread, saving it in a Airtable in our case, and posting it to social media on a schedule. So I found that doing this so far, and I'm still trying it out, but I found that doing this so far has saved me a lot of time. I know it sounds a little bit complicated to set up at first, but if you do plan to post a lot, which you need to do, especially if you're someone who's building an audience for the first time, as I am too in my case, I'm building an audience. I know I'm going to need to post a lot, perhaps multiple times a day. So I just want to make it as easy as possible for myself. So I have found that it starts to save time. And I especially really like being able to create a voice note and then having it basically automatically turn into a thread that I can post on social media. So now that this has been set up, when I want to post something, there's really only 2 things I need to do. I can record a voice note, which then automatically ends up in Airtable. So once a week, I just check Airtable and go through and review and approve all of the posts that are scheduled, and then they automatically get scheduled. And that's pretty much all I have to do on a week-to-week basis. So it does save me a bunch of time, and I don't have to worry about the creation part of it. Now, I did mention early on that you can also do the same thing with, so another use case for me is sometimes I just find an article that's interesting and I just want to share the article or summarize the key points from the article. So I set up a separate Slack channel for articles as well, where I can just share an article that I found and it'll do the same thing. It'll turn it into a thread, it'll summarize it, and it'll give the source. And on occasion, I'll come up with a little idea for a tweet or a short piece of content, and that I'm trying to do that through Slack also. So that way, all I have to do is think about posting it once to the right Slack channel, and I do it right in the moment, and then the rest is pretty much taken care of. The only other thing I'll say is if you're a beginner, if you find this to be a little bit intimidating or you think it's too complicated to set all these things up, you can actually do this in a very simple way. If you're just only posting a few pieces of content here and there, you can do the same thing. You can do a fair bit of automation, but just make a few of the pieces manual. So I said a simple thing you can do if you want to do the low text option is, so you still can use Slack, record your voice note, you get the transcript right then and there. You can plug it into ChatGPT or create a custom ChatGPT so that you have the instructions already fed in. That'll give you your thread, and then you can either come to New Link or go and schedule it manually through one of the other tools and just do it that way. There is a low tech option here if you don't want to go through this whole setup. But given the premise of what we're trying to do here is, which is to automate a lot of the key activities and have ultimately a self-driving company or largely self-driving company. For me, it's been worth the time investment to set up these automations. So, last thing I'll leave you with, I hope that was helpful in terms of just understanding how to create content, high quality content in a more automated way. I think last thing I'll leave you with here is a couple of considerations and a couple learnings for myself too. One is AI can save time, but it's not perfect and it needs human intervention. And as I mentioned earlier, you don't want to replace the insights and the unique value you bring. And personally, I really enjoy writing and I do like thinking of these ideas. So I don't want to take myself out of the pieces. I don't want to automate away the pieces that I actually like doing. So the nice thing about this is you can pick and choose which parts of the process you want to automate. In my case, I like the initial idea generation and I like the initial spark of an idea. And I do feel like I have some unique insights to share when it comes to product. So I want to keep that for myself. I just want to make it as easy as possible to then turn those little sparks of ideas into content that can be shared on different platforms. So, second thing is, I have, for the time being at least, I am continuing to manually review every single thing that is posted on platforms for either myself or my company. I think that's important to maintain a high quality bar for the types of information I post. Maybe in the future, I might remove that step if I start to feel more comfortable, but for now, I've got that step in. And the last thing I'll say is the world is changing very quickly. A lot of what we walk through here, this is just one way of doing it. I'm sure there's more automated or more seamless ways even now to kind of improve upon this. And I'll be thinking about that as well. So we'll want to continue to periodically reevaluate these workflows as new tools are introduced and as AI itself becomes better. So this is not a one-time process. We'll continue to revisit it over time. But at minimum, it should save you some time to start with, right? So I hope that helps give you an introduction to one piece of automating some of the work that you have to do as a founder or as a product builder. Stay tuned for more to come. And in future videos, we'll cover other topics as well, or we'll cover other topics as well. If you enjoyed this content, go ahead and hit the subscribe button or follow along. My goal is to help founders, product builders, solopreneurs upskill and train themselves for the future. I'm going to be continuing to produce more content and share learnings as I continue to build my business. This is an ongoing process. We're all learning as we go, and I'll share what's working and also sometimes what's not working too. So, yeah, follow along and feel free to leave some comments if there was something else you were expecting or if you had other feedback or you have other ideas. I always welcome that. So, I look forward to your comments and I look forward to continuing to share more content.